Welcome to College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by Capital One.
Two more rankings left before the new 12-team college football playoff bracket has to be filled. And every week there are questions, like take for instance last week it was who's going to be left out? Now it's who's still standing. Upsets and upheaval, and the questions change. And now it's how many tests can you flunk? How many hard tests should you have? And how do you determine whether the tests you had are actually that hard? Now, of course, even if you don't score at the top of the class, they're grading on a curve, so you should be able to pass with flying colors. Oh, and one more question. Did we leave the back door open for someone to slip into this field? The best path is still to win your conference, and somehow now that's even convoluted. So, a couple more pop quizzes until it's pencils down, and the committee answers questions and delivers the final grade.
Numbers are everywhere, all around us, leading us. More than digits in a sequence, they're symbols of success.
What's my definition of success? Listening to what your heart says.
Take what belongs to you. That's a pack. That is a dagger.
Here, a new landscape awaits. A new path to victory. This is where the line will end and the final test begins. For sole possession of the number one.
Arizona State with the win.
This has been the best story in college football.
Oklahoma crushes Alabama.
So many numbers in the world. So many teams vying for this prize.
You'll never recall. I know I can change. We are not enough. We are not the same.
But who's counting? We are.
A 12-team bracket, a 13-member committee meeting in Grapevine, Texas. They will get together one more time and then a final time in championship week. We've got rivalry week, championship week, and then we find out who will be in the first 12-team college football playoff field. Glad to have you with us. Reese Davis, Booger McFarland, Joey Galloway, Greg McElroy, taking you right up to Kansas and Duke, an abbreviated version of our Top 25 show tonight. Now, a reminder, I think most of you know this by now, about how this playoff works. There are a couple of things you have to keep in mind as you start to look at these rankings, which we'll unveil shortly. 12 teams into the field. This is how the bracket will look. 5 highest-ranked conference champions automatically included in the field. That means winners of their conference championship game. The 4 highest-ranked of those conference champions will get byes into the quarterfinals, which will be played in bowl games at neutral sites. The 5th highest-ranked champion will either be seated where the committee has them ranked, or if they're outside of the top 12, or at 12, they will get the 12th seed. So the 8 teams playing in the first round begin play on December 20th and on the 21st. And 5 through 8, the teams seeded 5 through 8 will play a home game, which in my judgment is probably the best thing about this expanded field. Playoff games on campus. Proceed through the bracket. There will be no reseeding until you get to the national championship game. In the quarterfinals, semifinals, neutral site games at the traditional bowl sites, the Power Bowl sites, and then the national championship will be determined in Atlanta on January 20th. And that will be the culmination of the first 12-team playoff. So as I mentioned, we're with you until the top of the hour. Let's show you the rankings, something that we always do. We see them when you do. College football playoff rankings brought to you by Capital One. Colorado, after its loss to Kansas, down 9 spots, still in the field. At 24, that could help some of the Big 12 teams. So too could Kansas State in terms of wins if they are considered for an at-large, which seems like a bit of a long shot. So you have 2 Big 12 teams getting into the rankings, and then Illinois, after a miraculous win and an error in judgment to try to freeze the kicker from Greg Schiano of Rutgers, and Illinois somehow won, and they moved up a couple of spots. Good weekend for Brett Bielema and the fellas. 22. UNLV, this is significant the way the Mountain West determines its championship game participants. UNLV is ranked there. They almost certainly will play Boise State for the Mountain West Championship. At 21, Missouri, Eli Drinkwitz's team with 8 wins and still in the top 25. Let's go to 20. Texas A&M, after the 4 overtime loss to Auburn, they fall 5 spots.
And don't pay attention to the 3 losses because they control their own fate. Beat Texas, win the SEC title game, A&M is in the playoff.
But that is the one thing, that's their only path.
Yes,
now.
yes.
Almost certainly. If they were to lose either to Texas or in the SEC championship game, should they make it, they would probably be eliminated. BYU, after that wild loss, BYU still in the mix for the Big 12 championship game, but an at-large seems far-fetched, now down 5 spots to 19 after losing to Arizona State at 18. Here's Iowa State. Now, Iowa State has a pretty, as clear as it can be in the Big 12, Iowa State has a pretty good shot of making it to the conference championship game. They move up 4 spots, going for their 10th win against Kansas State, ranked versus ranked game. Now Tulane. Tulane will play Army for the championship in the American. Tulane hoping to make a move to be that 5th highest ranked conference champion and make it into the field. Number 16. Got a lot of Big 12 in there, and Arizona State Territorial Cup game could give them their 10th win. They too. That's the most likely matchup, though not the certainty. Arizona State and Iowa State for the Big 12. A lot of different combinations and permutations could change that. At 15, South Carolina up 3 spots. Huge game coming up against Clemson. They can't get to the SEC championship game. They can make a bit of an at-large case.
Yeah, they can, and they can strengthen some teams' resumes, including Clemson, who is trying to make a late surge towards the college football playoff as a possible at-large in the event in which Miami loses to Syracuse. So a lot of things that could happen here with South Carolina improving up to 15.
At 14. Hotty toddy, Ole Miss absolutely squandered a perfect opportunity to get into the field with the loss to Florida. They go down 5 spots to number 14, and now they're going to need some upsets in front of them if they're going to make it into the field.
Well, they were on the inside, and Tennessee was on the outside, and we haven't seen Tennessee yet. But when you see Ole Miss drop, guessing that Alabama's going to drop, so it'll be interesting to see where Tennessee falls now that the door has been opened.
Now, we haven't seen this yet. I'd guess this is a good spot for Alabama right here at 13. Let's see. There they are, down 6 spots after just getting manhandled by Oklahoma on the road last Saturday night.
Alabama's a team that we've seen look like the best team in the country at times, and we've seen games like this against Oklahoma where they couldn't get a stop when they needed to, they couldn't get their offense on track, and so they were in a position to be in this playoff and not make the SEC championship and still be in. Now they put themselves on the outside, and they're going to need some chaos to get back in it.
And it confirms what we already knew. Alabama, not out of it, but by no means in control of their own destiny. They need some things to happen in front of them. SMU to lose to Cal. They need Tennessee to lose to Vandy. A handful of other outcomes this weekend to get them back in the driver's seat.
At number 12, Clemson up 5 spots. Clemson with only 2 losses, but Clemson doesn't have a lot of quality wins. Now, if Clemson's going to get in this mix for an at-large, they really, now it won't affect whether they make the ACC championship game, but if they could beat South Carolina at home on Saturday, then Dabo Swinney's Tigers, regardless of whether they play for the conference title, have a really good shot here.
It's an interesting spot because they have South Carolina. We haven't seen Indiana yet. When we start talking about these teams that don't have a huge win, obviously Indiana's still going to be within the top 11, but Clemson with that kind of game against South Carolina have a chance to make a statement.
Big 12 teams are the notable exception here, but you notice how the committee's done this a lot so far. You stack the 3-loss teams, then you go to the 2-loss teams. Let's look at number 11. Here's an exception, but it's a team outside the Power 4. So Boise State leading the Mountain West, but they're in the field. They're not taking a spot from anyone.
No, and what I think is also interesting is that the gap has now closed between the Big 12 and Boise State. So in the event in which the Big 12 champion runs the rest of the way, whether it's Arizona State over Iowa State, all those teams kind of ranked 15 through 17, would that be enough ammunition to move a Big 12 champion in front of Boise? So still Boise kind of hovering in that 12-11 area.
And, Reese, I love the fact with Boise State, Ashton Jeanty going over 2,000 yards. To me, I think they're in good shape. May not get a bye, but they're in good shape to get into the playoff.
They'll have the game at home in Mountain West Championship game playing against presumably UNLV. That's not set yet. Indiana, first big test at Ohio State. I thought for a good portion of the game they looked the part. Ended up Ohio State pulled away from them. They fall down to number 10, dropping 5 spots at number 9. Now here's a mover, SMU, unbeaten in ACC play. Their only loss against BYU, and they move up 4 spots. They're up to number 9.
And they've looked dominant. Out of the teams we've been talking about that have had the up and down, SMU has been a dominant team. They played Virginia last week, and they dominated the game from start to finish. And if I was a team looking out right now, I don't know that the SMU Mustangs is a team I would like to play because they're playing with a ton of confidence.
Well, sometimes you escape a game, and they did against Duke.
Yep.
And since that Duke game, they have been putting the hammer down to people. Number 8. Tennessee Volunteers, very upset when they were the first team out a couple of rankings ago. Now they're sitting there, number 8, finish up with Vanderbilt.
And Tennessee was on the outside looking in. A couple of teams losing in front of them. Now they're back on the inside. And interesting you see right now, a 2-loss Tennessee above a couple of 1-loss teams. The committee saying we're not going to pay attention to the column on the right so much. If we think you're a better team, we will seize you higher. That's important to note as we go forward.
They haven't done a lot of that. They've
Exactly.
done some of it. They do it here with Tennessee. And, I think that the other thing, too, Georgia, just above them, another 2-loss team. Georgia is already in the SEC championship game, awaiting the winner of Texas and Texas A&M.
And if I'm Tennessee, I am happy that I'm at 8 and not having to play in the SEC championship game. Georgia's going to have to play Texas or Texas A&M, have another game on their schedule, some more movement. If you're Tennessee, now you're sitting there like, hey,
beat Vandy, we're
in this thing.
Punch your ticket.
We got to beat
Exactly.
Vandy.
Yep.
We're in here.
Hey, and the thing, I would say last week, all the upsets, the 2 biggest beneficiaries, Tennessee and Indiana. Because Indiana now you're not really questioning anymore now because of what it's gone. Let's go to number 6, Miami. Now, SMU's unbeaten in ACC play. They have a spot in the championship game for the conference. Miami has to win at Syracuse to get in on Saturday.
And Miami, I think, still very, very good football team. You watch them, they're one of those teams that you'll look at the strength of schedule, you look at the game control, you look at the moments of greatness and the moments where you're kind of left shaking your head and you think, man, if they could ever put 60 minutes together, look out. That team is extremely dangerous and well positioned. They can take care of business this weekend to get that first round bye.
They have the quarterback that can make all of your other flaws disappear.
Yes.
With Cam Ward. Number 5. Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame's schedule is so-so. They'll finish up against USC.
The schedule can be so-so, but if you're Marcus Freeman, you go into your room and you tell the guys, hey, beat USC, we're in the playoff. It's really simple. You don't have to say anything else. You want to be in the playoff, beat USC, and we're in. That's where they put themselves in a great position now, Reese.
There have been so many of these SEC teams that have lost road games at night. Notre Dame has a road win in an SEC stadium at night. Easily their best win. Number 4, Penn State. Lost to Ohio State at home. Escape Minnesota. Nittany Lions is keep taking care of business. Longhorns play A&M. College game day will be in College Station this weekend. Texas is 3, and number 2 is going to be Ohio State, and number 1 is going to be Oregon. So you have the Big Ten now with 3 of the top 5, and Notre Dame, still from the state of Indiana, but not from the Big Ten, moving in and taking one of those top 5 spots. So now you look at the rankings on the left. Here's how you put them into the bracket. Conference champions that are automatically in the field: Oregon, Texas, Miami, and Boise State. Now remember, we are basing it on the highest ranked teams from these conferences. To get into the quarterfinals, you will have to win your conference championship game. Arizona State, the highest ranked team at the moment from the Big 12. Home games, 5 through 8, would belong to Ohio State, Georgia, Penn State, Notre Dame, not in that order, but you see top to bottom on the bracket. All of those teams would be able to play at home in the first round of the college football playoff. And then the full bracket would look like this. You would have another Tennessee at Georgia game, which we saw in the regular season. You'd have Indiana and Penn State, a Big Ten matchup, but they did not play in the regular season. And then SMU and Notre Dame and Arizona State and Ohio State would conjure up memories of Rose Bowls from years gone by and perhaps would be referred to as the John Cooper Bowl in the first round since he coached at both places. So still a couple of weeks. Clemson, Alabama, the first two teams out. What's your reaction? Anything stick out to you from this ranking?
Well, just to add on to what I was saying, to me, this committee, you're starting to get a picture of what they're looking at. Yeah, they're going to look at the metrics. We're going to look at strength of schedule, and we're going to look at all these different things. But when you look at clearly what they did with the two-loss teams, Georgia and Tennessee above one-loss team, they're clearly saying it doesn't matter about the number in the right-hand side of the column as far as the losses. We're going to decide by watching these games who's the better team. And I think if you feel like that you have an opportunity for the college football playoff, you go out. It matters how you play in the game. It matters what you put on tape because they're watching the tape. And for me, as a guy who's played, I think that's refreshing to see.
And Boise State finally cracked number 12. They were 12, 13, 12. Now they've gone up to 11. And Greg, you mentioned it. You want to see the gap between Boise State and the Big 12, which Arizona State comes in at number 16. So there's 5 spots. And so with 2 weeks left, you get into that game, the biggest question is going to be, can the Big 12 find its way, can its champion find its way to jump in front of Boise State and get the bye in that first week? That'll be interesting to me.
One thing I think is really interesting, we've been talking a lot about strength of schedule metrics and all this. Like, how many times have we been talking about that for the last few weeks? What the committee has basically told us is that while strength of schedule is valued, it is by no means the end-all, be-all. I think game control and strength of record, if we're looking at metrics, those are the metrics that seemingly are more beneficial to this version of the committee, because you look at some of the teams that are in the top 5 right now, or in the top 10 right now. You have SMU, 77. You have Clemson, who is sitting there at 12. They're 57. You have Miami, who's 59. You have Indiana, who's 51. All that's fine. I'm not saying they got it wrong. I'm just suggesting that that's something that maybe we didn't know about this committee. Here we are talking about, well, who they played. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's more about how you look. And some of these teams, I think, are being ranked highly because of that.
Well, and that's where the coaches in the room make a difference. Because I never want this to come down to, you know what, let's look at a number. 2 + 2 is 4 + 2. Like, I don't want that. Let's go. Let's watch the games, see who the better teams are. Now, at some point, there's a line of differentiation when you come. You can't have 4 losses and we still think you're good. But at a certain point, I can watch the games and determine who's better. To me, that's how it should be.
Yeah. Well, everyone has a vote. And some people may be thinking that. And some people may be looking at the metrics that Greg is looking at. And I think that's why this committee is so special, because you get 13 people with a different view of things. Yeah. And we sit on this desk and always have these conversations. We have different opinions. Mm-hmm. That's why it's so good. And they've been really good at getting the teams. I think when we look at the teams that are in right now, there's not much to argue about this.
There have been, in the past rankings, there have been some stacking up 1 loss, 2 loss, but they've started to change that up a little bit. Maybe, they go in with a blank slate. People might reconsider things. And when we talk about the strength of schedule numbers, we've spoken a lot, and I've spoken a lot about Indiana's prior to last week. It was in the 100s. It jumped 50 spots. I've been watching this a long time.
Right.
I don't recall that happening. And our projections show, I feel like we're doing election night coverage, but the projections show that even after playing Purdue, who might be the worst team in Power 4 football, maybe one of the worst teams in the country, still only going to fall maybe in the 60s or something like that. It's not going to fall as much as it rose after they played Ohio State. Heather Denich, who follows this closely for us, does such a terrific job standing over at the touchscreen, got the bracket right there in front of you. Heather, what jumps out to you about this latest edition of the rankings?
Well, a couple of things. One, in a matter of weeks, the ACC has gone from 1 team to 3 teams, right? And Clemson, with a win against South Carolina, as you guys talked about, could be very big to jump in, but can it bump them above Boise State? Because if it doesn't, they are still out at that number 12 spot for the projected Big 12 champion. Another thing to watch moving forward with rivalry week is Georgia playing a common opponent with Miami and Georgia Tech, the one team that they lost to. Georgia beats Georgia Tech. Is that enough for the committee to flip them? Does it really matter? It could matter for seeding. If Georgia plays Texas, loses to Texas in the SEC championship game, gets in as an at-large bid. And here's one other strange, controversial thing to pay attention to in this ranking. We are talking about the possibility of the Big 12 champion ultimately jumping Boise State and getting a bye, which is possible. But people need to know that the 5 highest ranked conference champions are not guaranteed to the Power 4. And if you look down in the ranking, Tulane is sneaking around there. What happens if you have a 3-loss Big 12 champion? And Tulane runs the table and wins the American Athletic Conference as a 2-loss champion. Now, I am not projecting, as we stand here today, that they would get that 5th highest ranked spot and bump out the Big 12, but I am saying it could open the door for that debate, and people need to know the rules, that it's not a reservation for the Power 4 conferences.
That's a great point, Heather. And the one thing is, you look at the rankings, they do have Kansas State ranked, and Kansas State beat Tulane earlier this year, and Kansas State's highly unlikely to be in the Big 12 championship game. So, great thing to keep an eye on. Tulane may be better right now. That may come into play as well. Can you even imagine?
Tulane's good now.
They're really good.
Tulane's
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. But they lost their 2 games against Power 4 opponents. They lost to Kansas State, lost to Oklahoma. So, tall hill to climb, but they have improved. Those were early on.
No doubt about it.
Great thing to keep an eye on. Oh man, Brett Yormark, the commissioner.
Hands would explode.
The commissioner. Oh my goodness.
Hands would
Can you imagine?
explode.
You go Mountain West, go Mountain West American, or let SMU get knocked off this week, and then.
You thought last year was controversial.
Yeah.
This year's gonna be real controversial. We got some fun coming.
That's why we'll bring Ward Manuel in. We're going to go easy on him tonight and next week, but. Come that selection day, Ward's going to have to answer some questions. We're going to have to come with some answers, as he always does. Always great to have Ward with us in 15 minutes. The sensational freshman from Duke leading the Blue Devils against Kansas. Countdown to tip-off inside 15 minutes between these two powers.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by Capital One. What's in your wallet? And in part by Mercedes-Benz. You're watching College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by Capital One.
Kansas and Duke coming up at the top of the hour. Time now to take a look at our Capital One rewarding performance, and it's still B1G leading the way, projecting the playoff by virtue of the current rankings. 4 teams from the Big Ten would be in the field, only 3 from the SEC, 2 now from the ACC, Big 12 Mountain West at the moment, but as Heather Dinich pointed out, the American Conference could be lurking with Tulane's surge up to number 17, as they are ranked right in the midst of a bevy of Big 12 teams, many of whom are vying to play in the championship game. Chair of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, Ward Manuel, is with us now. Ward, let's start with one of the big topics from last week was Indiana, whether it could prove itself. Now, it appears from you looking at this edition of the rankings that the Hoosiers also benefited from the fact that there were upsets. How did the committee view Indiana's performance against Ohio State Saturday?
Well, Reese, good to be with you again. We viewed Indiana. They played well at times against Ohio State, and Ohio State pulled out a victory and really came on in the second half of that game. But we were impressed with some of the things that Indiana did, and they dropped 5, but we still felt that their body of work was strong enough to remain in the top 10.
Ward, Heather Dinich made a great point a moment ago, that just a reminder to everyone that the 5 highest ranked conference champions doesn't mean that any conference is guaranteed, including any of the Power 4. You have Tulane starting to surge, but Tulane lost a couple of games against Power 4 opponents early in the season. How do you balance, how does the committee balance looking maybe at what the Green Wave is now with a chance to win the American championship as opposed to what they were under a new coach, say, the first couple weeks of the season?
Yeah, it is a balance, Reese. I mean, we have to look at what teams do throughout the season. And obviously, as we watch film, as we take a look at what teams are doing against the opponents that they have to face, we see a Tulane team that is really playing great football right now. And they had a really dominant win this past weekend. Or the weekend before, and they're really, one of the teams that has surged up in our mind as it relates to how they're playing at this time.
I've promised that I would ask this question of you every week until the selections are made on Selection Day about teams that lose in the conference championship. And I think most people suppose that we were just talking about the SEC. But now it's starting to come into play for the ACC. How will the committee evaluate a team that maybe is close to the bottom of the rankings, like SMU right now, bottom meaning in terms of making the field, if it doesn't win its conference championship game?
Well, Reese, I won't project what the committee will do, but what I'll say is that we have high regard, as I've said in the past, for the teams that make the championship. That's a big deal to make the conference championship. And so we're going to watch those games and make sure as we watch them that we look at everything that's going on in those games, everything that they've done throughout the season, as we look at where to rank them in the final week.
What would be the appetite in your judgment? Let's say that you come down to those final spots, or even as you rank the teams right now for those spots that would hover right around the cut line. What's the appetite for ranking a team with more losses ahead of a team with fewer losses? Say a 3-loss team ranked ahead of a 2-loss team, a 2-loss team bumping a 1-loss team out of the field if they weren't at large.
Well, I think the appetite is there to rank the teams as we see them. And if a team with one more loss than a team in front of them and we feel like they should be ahead of them, then we've shown that we will do that. In the past 10 years in the history of the CFP, there has been 22 teams that have been ranked in the top 12 with 3 losses. And so the committee's never been afraid to rank teams with multiple losses within the top 12 if we see them that way.
Ward, appreciate your time, my friend. Look forward to talking to you next week. And then after that, we'll be off to Selection Day. Best of luck. Thanks a lot for being with us.
Thanks, Reese. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family, my friend. That is Ward Manuel, one man who used to ply his trade on Ward Manuel's campus at Michigan. Hunter Dickinson now one of the leaders of the Kansas Jayhawks. Scored almost 2,300 points. How many will he get against that young, talented Blue Devil team?
This is College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by Capital One. College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by Capital One. What's in your wallet?
A&M coming off that 4-overtime loss to Auburn welcomes Texas back. The fight song sing about saying goodbye to each other. And for the first time since 2011, they say hello to each other. And game day will be there 9 a.m. Eastern time. Longhorns and the Aggies. And that brings us to the road test presented by Goodyear. And that A&M defense is going to have to keep Quinn Ewers in check. He's 15th in the country in completion percentage. The Aggies have allowed opponents to complete just over half of their passes, 52%. That is second best in the country. You know, since we started this playoff thing, we started in the offseason, and, I've gone through this playoff explainer, and I've given America great credit, Booger. You could do it in your sleep. I know. Greg, he could do it in his sleep. Joey, meanwhile, is telling me he doesn't understand. There's home games. Arizona State wouldn't get a home game.
I'm crunching numbers over here, Reese, sometimes.
You're just all in the strength of record.
But when we look at this honestly, last weekend, 5, 7, 9, 14, 15, 16, 19 went down, and it felt like we were winding down at the end, and there wasn't much left. We found out there is a lot of football left to be played. Yeah. And teams that thought they were out are now in. Teams that were in are now out. I hope this next weekend is just as good as the last.
I wouldn't make vacation plans on December 20th or 21st just yet. If I were some of these teams that are on the outside looking in, whether it's Clemson, Bama, Ole Miss, I'm not saying it's likely you get in. I'm just saying based on the lack of predictability we've had in the sport this year, anything can happen this weekend. Would it surprise any of y'all if Syracuse beat Miami? No. Not
Would
it surprise you if South Carolina beat Clemson? There too.
No, South Carolina's the hottest team in the country.
Yeah, so I mean, you look at this, how this all could unfold. I mean, a lot of things could happen. I mean, SMU could lose to Cal at home. I mean, these things happen every week. So I think it's right now we are living in a world where there are maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 elite teams, and everybody else is just solid. And I'm just not really sure what to make, if those solid teams can elevate or if those elite teams will fall back.
Well, and that's because there's so much parity in college football, and you can blame that on the transfer portal, NIL, whatever you want to blame it on. I think the question you keep asking, Ward, is a question that is going to come into play next week. If you get into the conference championship game, are we going to hold that against you? And in some ways, they say no, but in other ways, if you get blown out in that game, it's clearly going to be against you. We're going to applaud you for getting there, but you better play well.
Do you agree with that?
You know what, Reese? If you make it to the championship game, it should not be held against you because you've already achieved something. But if you go there and you lay an egg, at some point I have to pay attention to what you put on tape. And if you put a bad performance on tape, it's going to be counted against you.
I wouldn't mind sitting that out. I wouldn't mind sitting
here we go again.
I'm just telling you.
You're going to set the whole team out?
If I'm Tennessee, go ahead and play again.
I want to tell you one more that you didn't mention to watch out for. USC lost 5 games. Total of 19 points. Fourth quarter lead in every game, and they've got Notre Dame.